This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 545 of the Late Round Podcast, on many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Before I get going with this week's trends, I wanted to remind you that FanDuel is giving you a free way to get in on the NFL action. The FanDuel NFL High-Low is a free-to-play fantasy football contest. All you have to do is build your scorecard with the teams you think will score highest or lowest in 4 stat categories. The closer you are to being spot on, the more points you'll get. Players with the most points each week will split the prize pool, and a perfect scorecard will win the jackpot. Head over to FanDuel.com today and play the FanDuel High-Low for free. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. So last week I talked about the Ravens' backfield and how they've split it pretty heavily under Greg Roman. And then I mentioned how they don't target their backfield at a very high rate. Well, that first part continued in week 1. No Ravens running back had higher than a 48% running back rush share, and the highest snap share from a Ravens running back was from Tyson Williams, and he played 51.5% of their snaps. The streak of no running back hitting that 70% mark, it continues. But the receiving aspect was different on Monday night. Tyson Williams had 4 targets and a 13.8% target share in Baltimore's loss. That was the 4th highest target share for a running back in a Baltimore offense over the last 2 years, or since Lamar Jackson fully became starter in that offense. Maybe this has to do with the Baltimore pass catching group being a little bit banged up and it being a little bit newer, but it's something to monitor moving forward. Trend 2 this week is that Austin Ekeler didn't see a single target in week 1. It was the first time in his career where he saw 10 or more rushes while being held without a target. And here's the crazy part. Austin Ekeler had 2 goal line rushes. My stance on Ekeler is that he was actually almost a buy candidate on the 15 transaction show yesterday. The fact that he saw this goal line work is really, really encouraging. The fact that he didn't see a target share, that's not, especially when you consider what Anthony Lynn's running backs did in Detroit this past weekend. Because what if Anthony Lynn was helping boost this target share for Ekeler all along? That thought at least creeps into your mind. But I'm going to bank on Ekeler seeing more work through the air moving forward because we know that he can do that well. We have years of evidence pointing to Austin Ekeler being a good receiver. If he sees the goal line work too, that could really put together a top 5 season in PPR formats. So right now, I think Ekeler is a buy. Darren Waller led all tight ends in target share in week 1. That's not surprising. But you know who number 2 was? Adam Troutman. The Saints just didn't throw the ball a whole lot, but Troutman saw 6 of a possible 20 targets in that offense in week 1. He turned that into 3 catches for 18 yards, and Juwan Johnson ended up stealing the show because of what he did in the red zone. But as I mentioned on the 15 transactions episode yesterday, Troutman doubled Johnson in both targets and routes run. The peripherals are there. When the Saints aren't facing the script that they faced in week 1, Troutman could really explode. Another player I was close to making a buy in 15 transactions this week was Antonio Gibson. And the reason why is pretty simple. He was used as a bell cow in week 1. There was some concern over how the football team would deploy Gibson as a pass catcher this year. But in week 1, he handled 87% of the team's running back rushes, and he had almost a 24% target share. It wasn't J.D. McKissick benefiting from dump-offs. So if you drafted Gibson, good on you. The main reason he's not a clear-cut buy is because of the Fitzpatrick injury. But I do still think that Gibson will be okay. I lean more buy with Gibson than sell for sure. And if you can get him cheaper than you should because of that Fitzpatrick injury, I say go for it. No quarterback threw it deep at a higher rate in week 1 than Russell Wilson. Over 30% of his attempts traveled 15 or more air yards. This isn't that big of a surprise given Wilson usually does well in this category, but it's a good sign with new offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. Wilson was just insanely efficient against the Colts. Now on the flip side, Andy Dalton ranked last in deep ball rate, but Jalen Hurts was second to last. Only one of Hurts' 35 pass attempts went 15 or more air yards. That's nothing really to worry about necessarily, especially given the game script that they saw. But again, it's something worth monitoring moving forward. Trend 6 this week is related to this week's hot waiver wire ad, Elijah Mitchell. As I noted yesterday, Mitchell ended up with a running back rush share of 86.4% in that game against Detroit. I went back and looked, and since Kyle Shanahan took over as head coach of the 49ers in 2017, that running back rush share was the 4th highest from any running back in that San Francisco offense. A lot went Mitchell's way in week 1, obviously. The team didn't dress Trey Sermon, Raheem Mostert went out early, but it's still interesting and somewhat telling that they like Mitchell. Like I said yesterday, though, don't drop Trey Sermon. There's a non-zero chance he ends up seeing more work than Mitchell, not just throughout the season, but maybe as soon as this week. That doesn't mean that Mitchell's not a great ad. He is. You just need to be thinking about this in a probability-driven way instead of a black and white one. As we know, the Lions targeted their running backs a ton out of the backfield on Sunday. DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams ended the day with a combined 35.7% target share. Detroit didn't lead the league in running back target share in week 1, though. It was actually Indianapolis who did. Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, they combined to see almost 43% of the Colts' targets. This is very, very, very good news for those of you who have Jonathan Taylor. Phillip Rivers is obviously no longer there, and there's some evidence that running back targets are tied to quarterbacks. But without really good alternatives in that offense to go along with a negative game script, we saw the running backs heavily utilized. Taylor should end up being an RB1 this year if he stays healthy. And that was a little bit questionable for some entering the season. Chester Rogers led the Titans in receiving in week 1. You've got A.J. Brown and you have Julio Jones, and Chester freaking Rogers leads that team in receiving. It was a disastrous start for the Tennessee Titans. Ryan Tannehill kind of saved his fantasy day with a rushing touchdown, but it was bad. And it absolutely makes you wonder if losing Arthur Smith is going to be a big deal for this offense. In week 1, 11.6% of Tannehill's dropbacks involved play action, according to Pro Football Focus. Last year, that rate was 36.4%, which was the highest in the league. We really want that number to be higher in order to help the Tennessee passing attack. I know game script got away from them, but it was still a really low number in week 1. The Saints were lowest in the league in week 1 in wide receiver target share, but right next to them was kind of a surprise, and it was Atlanta. Only 30.3% of Atlanta's targets went to wide receivers against Philadelphia. Now, I've gotten a lot of questions since Sunday asking about what people should do with Calvin Ridley. I don't think it's time to sell. It's always tough when a player starts the season cold, but Ridley still accounted for 24% of the team's targets, meaning the other wide receivers on the Falcons, they were a much bigger issue. Russell Gage was the only other wide receiver on that team who was targeted, and he didn't catch a single pass. So hold Ridley. I wouldn't go buying him, but in places where I have him, I'm not selling low. The final trend this week is about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. A lot of people are rightfully disappointed by his RB32 performance in week 1. But let's look at the positives. That's what I'm here to do. I want to make you feel better. CEH saw 87.5% of Kansas City's running back rushes against Cleveland. His average per game last year was 68.4%. Meanwhile, he was close enough to his target share per game average last year too. He had a 9% target share against the Browns. It wasn't the easiest matchup in the world for Edwards-Helaire, and the script in that game was not one that Kansas City's likely going to see a lot this year. So similar to Calvin Ridley, I'm not selling CEH low. I'm holding. That's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the Weekly Sleeper Show.